Hello and welcome to the Morning Skate Podcast. I am Matt Moody, running back another solo episode for this Thursday, March 1st, NHL Daily Fantasy Slate. Still no DJ. If you were paying attention on Wednesday night, DJ was out there rooting on the Sabres to victory against the Tampa Bay Lightning. So we will be without him for one more show. He should be back next week, and all should be good to go. But for now, you're still stuck with me. Let's just lead this one off. If you're on the drive to work or whatever, don't crash your car trying to do this. But if you're at work, just looking for something to do, I did write a very cool article for Fantasy Labs, if I may say so myself. It's more of an evergreen piece, and it's about the increase in scoring across the NHL this season. And just, I found it fascinating. Like, it was a fantastic idea, and someone pitched it to me, and I'm like, hey, I think I can run with that. And it essentially shows like what's happened across the league that has led to this increase of scoring. It's a number of different factors that I think are contributing to it, and it was really fun to write. So if you're looking for something to do today, be sure to check that out. Uh, while we're on the plugs, if you didn't catch the mention either on the podcast or in the group me, on our site, morningskatepod.com, we have a guide on how to use the software R. It's essentially a stats package that's like Excel but on steroids. So what's different about it is that instead of the English-based nature of Excel, it's more language-driven. And so what Doug did, if you don't know Doug, he is the creator of The Sim, just all around computer genius, and also really good for fantasy purposes. So what he did is he basically compared everything that you could do in Excel to what it would look like in R. And so that's another thing if you're just looking for, activities, something to learn that really helps your DFS game. I can say without a doubt that that has saved me hours upon hours. Just having something like R that allows me to basically do things, but in a coded matter rather than pointing, clicking, dragging. So just a couple of really cool things that you should check out. That's at morningskatepod.com/r guide, r dash guide. And your feedback there would be appreciated. And then on fantasylabs.com, that's a free article for everyone. So check that out. It was really cool. So let's get to the slate on hand. We're looking at pretty nice slate. Thursday's the typical, bigger slate, bigger prize pools, etc. across the board. So we've got 8 games here on Thursday, first slate of March. So be sure to get on in that listener league if you want a chance to be on the podcast. We will tally up the February results and announce the winner sometime next week. So without further ado, here are the 8 games on the slate. We've got Pittsburgh at Boston, Carolina at Philly, New Jersey at Florida, Tampa at Dallas, Nashville at Edmonton, Minnesota at Arizona, Chicago at San Jose, and Columbus at Los Angeles. So on the slate, we have one team on a back-to-back. That would be the Tampa Bay Lightning, who fly from home all the way to Dallas to play in an 8:30 face-off. The status of Nikita Kucherov is probably the main news there, but keep that in mind when looking at Tampa in general. So let's start off with the first game, Pittsburgh at Boston. As we all know, Patrice Bergeron is out for at least a couple weeks. My assumption is that it would be like a month or so because he has a fractured bone in his foot. That'll keep him sidelined for a while. And how they reacted to that news as of last game, they moved Riley Nash up to the first line with Pastrnak and Marchand, and they also played. So let's see, they had Backes and Nash join Marchand, Pastrnak, Krug on the power play. So I'm honestly not sure who is taking the power play faceoffs. My assumption is David Backes was, but it's interesting that they have no true center on that line. or on that power play unit, I should say, and it kind of hurts Riley Nash's overall value as well. First line with those two certainly worth a look, but at 4.5K, he was priced up a full thousand after Tuesday slate. I'm not that interested. I think Rick Nash is interesting, even at 6,000. He's come in and had a couple really nice games for them. Even so, the two games with Boston, he has 5 shots. The game before he was traded, he had 5 shots. And then just a really nice run of production for him in terms of shot floor. And he's getting first power play minutes at home against a Pittsburgh team that loves to push the pace. So I can certainly see Rick Nash doing some damage there. Um, I don't know about Brad Marchand at his price at 7,200. I just feel like he's so dependent on Bergeron to kind of be at that price that I'm not comfortable with it. However, David Pastrnak at 6.1 is almost in the ultimate buy low spot. He's been very inefficient lately, and the minutes have never really been there, like on a overly consistent basis for him. But I mean, 6.1 for a guy with Pasternak's talent, that seems pretty. That seems right up there along the top, I guess, upper mid tier plays on the slate. So, a name I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on. Defensively, I'm kind of looking at a punt, maybe a guy like Matt Grzelcyk, who has stepped in and played a pretty decent role the last 2 games, averaging 17 minutes over that span with power play time. He has solid track record, and barring any barring any demotions or changes in their lineup, I think he could be a viable punt for 2.9. Given his power play time, he had limited exposure to that first power play. It was mainly Torrey Krug, but definitely a name that I'm keeping an eye on if I'm looking to punt defense. We'll say that the punt or the stars and scrub strategy on Tuesday did not work out for me. Just a brutal, brutal night. I had the Florida stack that did pretty well. Barkov and Trocheck on any other slate would have been considered smashes, I think, with Yandel, who I think picked up 2.5 points, which is whatever. And then I got a shutout in that. I got the Ben Bishop ceiling game, like 13 points out of him, and the rest of my lineup was complete doo-doo. I paid up for Ovi, spent way down on the Edmonton punts, and in general, it's going to be tough for me to go back to that sort of strategy. We just have so many names in the mid tier who are very, very good producers that it might be worth, not punting on some guys who you think you like them, but you just never know when coaches are going to change their mind and play guys, a much smaller amount than you would expect, especially when they're unproven guys. So that was just, I guess, a little tangent there. I don't think I'll be punting too much on this slate. With that said, David Backes is hashtag not that good at hockey. However, over the past 10 games, he's nearly at 3 shots per game, 4.9. I mentioned he's on the first power play. So if you're looking to game stack this one, I think there's a lot of wings in contention for the Boston side. Again, I would not really touch Riley Nash, given that he's not on any power play unit, let alone that first one. But the Pittsburgh side is one that I think is worth discussing because almost every slate, Pittsburgh tops my model in terms of like expected goals lately. A bit of a lead in to what I mentioned on Fantasy Labs. I mentioned that one of the potential reasons for scoring being up across the NHL is that the NHL is such a copycat league, and when Pittsburgh, led by Malkin and Crosby, leads the league the past 2 seasons in expected goals for per 60, right down the middle of the league in terms of expected goals against. So they're a good team, but they're definitely one of the faster paced teams in the NHL. Teams like to copy that and kind of push the pace in response to them. So that's kind of why Pittsburgh leads my model most of the time, because that's what they're actively doing. But Boston, I mean, man, they've been so good up and down the lineup. It hasn't just been a Patrice Bergeron thing. Like, even without him on the ice this season, they're a damn good team. I'm not overly interested in Pittsburgh at these prices. I just feel like if you're chasing that Crosby game, you're probably not going to, you're probably not going to get it again with 7 shots and a goal last game. He's not really playing with the sort of line mates who I want to stack him around. And a road matchup with the Boston Bruins is much, much more difficult than a home matchup against the New Jersey Devils. So there's not a whole lot by way of Pittsburgh that I'm that interested in. That Brassard Kessel line did play a ton of minutes last game. Derek Brassard at 4.9 with his second power play time could be, could be a decent candidate, but I'm kind of looking for more featured players than Derek Brassard, as stacking him with Kessel is quite expensive regardless. So it's not like you're getting a great value, even though they're both on the third line. You're probably just getting depressed ownership, which against Boston isn't really something I'm looking to target all that actively. And just playing the Pittsburgh power play game for another night, Justin Schultz now for the past 2 games has been exclusively with the first power play in Pittsburgh. Putting a damper on Letang's value and moving Schultz into the solid play range. 4.2 for about 20 minutes. Put up decent floor numbers lately, so I can get behind it. But he's just, if it's almost better for their power play that he's not involved, given that Malkin and Crosby and Kessel are so good with the pucks on their stick, that Schultz is kind of more of an outlet guy who just dishes from Malkin to Kessel, essentially. But, if you're stacking in GPPs, Schultz makes for the better play than Chris Letang, in my opinion, just given what we know. But that could certainly change. All right, moving on to Carolina at Philadelphia. Philadelphia has been so good lately that it's really tough to ignore them against I guess they're a struggling Carolina team. I mean, they're certainly not one of like the worst teams in the league or anything, but it just seems like every time you look, Carolina's just out there like not getting lit up, but they're just giving up goals to these teams that you're like, man, they have no interest giving up, this many goals to those sort of teams. So, yeah, just looking back, each of their last 7 games, they've given up at least 3 goals. The Hurricanes have. So that immediately has me a bit intrigued with the Philly side of things. Um, Nolan Patrick is sitting, at a nice price at 4.7 still, given that Wayne Simmons is still on IR. Patrick will be on that first power play, and I think that gives him more than enough value to, to play in your team, stack him up with Voracek if you'd like. This Oscar Lindblom kid, man, I say kid, he's exactly my age, but he's gonna do stuff. I if maybe not now, but he's playing in the top 6 for them with power play 2 time. I think he's gonna have, he doesn't need a big night to smash, but I think he's going to if he's playing with Voracek and Patrick for 16 minutes a night like he has been with power play time. I just think he's going to pot a goal sooner than later, and he's going to be a fantastic value. You look at his AHL profile, he profiles pretty well for daily fantasy at 2.9 top 6 minutes, but we haven't really seen it yet. So it's one of those guys who I think is a better punt than someone who than someone who is thrust into a role in a matchup that we're not quite as interested in. Cough, cough, Edmonton at home against Nashville, but certainly not someone that I'm looking to play right off the bat. Really multi-entry. If you love a team, 2.9. I think Lindblom might be your guy though. Gostisbehere, certainly have to mention him, averaging 4.5 fantasy points per game over his last 10. No goals over that span, which is even more impressive. So he's really doing it all. I mean, that game against Montreal was a definite snooze fest, and like that'll happen. I can't really explain that one away. It was just kind of one of those games that, like, yeah, there should have been more. It should have been more than a shutout both ways, but it certainly wasn't a up and down type affair where you would expect Philly to kind of be playing in. But I still think Gostisbehere is a fine play here. So definitely a name that the Sim's going to love and one that I'm okay with playing. But I think the main targets here for me are that line of Voracek, Patrick, and Lindblom. So Let's move to the Carolina side. With no Jordan Stahl, I don't expect him back. Okay, actually, he is expected back on Thursday. He did meet up with the team on Wednesday, so Jordan Stahl should step into that top line. That means that the first line of last game, which was actually Lindholm instead of Rask, they switched up almost right away. Lindholm between Aho and Teravainen. That will probably be Stahl, Aho, and then either Lindholm or Teravainen, with Rask shuffling down to a more reasonable but less fantasy friendly third line role. So looking at Jordan Stahl, his price didn't really move much while he was out. It wasn't too long, so you wouldn't really expect it to. But he's down from 5.6 to 4.8, which I think is still a little bit overpriced for a guy like him. In all honesty, um, just hockey aside, or personal like motivations, whatever aside, I'm not really seeing 4.8 for Jordan Stahl being like a solid floor play by any means. And I don't think he has a ton of upside either as like a daily fantasy offensive type player. So I'm pretty much off of this Carolina side. I don't really see any prices that have fallen too much to the point where I'm like all in on them by any means. So maybe that'll change if we get some new lines with the Stahl returning. But as for right now, I think I'm pretty safe fading Carolina against a Philly team that's just been lights out as of late. So let's go to New Jersey at Florida, which, as expected, is one of my favorite games of the night. This New Jersey side, Cal Palmieri is like all the way back. It's almost disappointing that he is now at 5.7, but Christ, man, he's got 20 shots over the last 3 games with 3 goals to go with it. He's playing with Taylor Hall in all situations, and he's making the most of it. So I think you have to keep him in mind. Taylor Hall has been off the charts excellent lately. I think he's on a 22 game point streak now. I'm not really sure why the NHL won't count his 7 games before being injured as part of his point streak, as his 15 game point streak that he's on since injury leads the NHL this season in terms of longest point streak. So it's just incredible what he's done. 7,700. It's tough. It's definitely not a price that you're readily willing to stomach, but with Kucherov being a question mark on the slate, I don't think Stamkos is a great play. Just he's not really been the same sort of shooter as he was in past seasons. And then the guys are below Paul being Marchand, Drew, Kessel, and then Petty Kane down at 6.8. Like Granlund, Evander Kane, Hornqvist, Zucker. I think Taylor Hall is easily the top spend here. You might be able to make a case for Patrick Kane, but he's on the road. Like Taylor Hall's on the road, but I think Florida's a better matchup than San Jose is, especially offensively. So I think Taylor Hall is where I'm going to be spending at wing should I choose to spend up into this range. He's just been so incredible. His shot rate's top 20 in the NHL. You can stack him up with Kyle Palmieri, who's, we know he's a decent shooter as well. You get a nice upside, fantastic floor out of those two, and you're going to get all the usage you can. Speaking of all the usage that you can manage, this Florida team, they played Barkov 26 minutes against Toronto the other night. I know that went into overtime, whatever, but you just can't argue with, when you're spending up on players, you want to know that their coaches are doing everything they can to get them in the game. And so, if you're talking, I don't mean to pick on a guy like Patrick Laine, but look at a guy like, well, Winnipeg's out on the slate, but I'm gonna take a wild guess and bet that Patrick Laine's average time on ice is about 16 to 17 minutes a night. Um, and when guys like Trocheck and Barkov, or even a Dadonov type, who's not quite getting quite the same minutes, but is probably a better comparable to Laine himself. But when Barkov is playing literally an average of 24 minutes a night, that is so much better than anyone else on the entire slate that it raises his projection by that much. Like I think it's pretty, it's basically McDavid level in terms of usage. If you look at their last 10 games, like Barkov's is a full 2 minutes better per game than McDavid. So that just is the reason I keep going back to this Barkov Trocheck well. Like, not only are their rate stats pretty good, and obviously they're wildly talented offensive players, but their floors, just because they're on the ice so much, is massive. And so I really like those two. Again, they're a little bit pricier than they were the other day, but I think stacking them both together makes perfect sense. Like, they're both monsters basically from a daily fantasy setting, and I think that stacking them certainly leaves you with enough upside and enough floor that you can be very comfortable in stacking the two, given that I'm not seeing a ton of prices on the slate that I am absolutely in love with. So, uh, yeah, I mean, you can stack Trocheck with a guy like Redeem Verbata, 3.2 now. Picked up an assist the other night and played for 14 minutes, which is fine. I'm not going to argue with that, but I think you have to correlate Verbata with Trocheck in order to make it worth his while. I just don't see a case in where uh, Trocheck, I don't see a case in which Verbata smashes without Trocheck doing very well. Um, Oh wow, watching the game on mute, and Johnny Gaudreau just took a skate to the neck. So hopefully he's all right. But anyways, moving on to the defensive side here, uh, Keith Yandel, 5.1 still. They're not moving his price. Like, he's certainly not a must play in GPPs, but I think if you're playing cash games, like, getting this guy at home is just like, you just got to expect that he'll be involved in the first power play. He does enough with floor wise that I think he's in play on every single slate. So, up pace matchup, right there, right back on the Keith Yandel wagon. Um, let's see, Ekblad, Matheson. I think we know the drill of Florida. Like, their top three defensemen are all pretty good for daily fantasy. None of them are going to break a slate. Maybe outside of that 1 in 100 type game where one of them gets 2 goals or 3 points or something. But that's certainly not why you're playing them. I think you're playing them for solid floors with decent point upside. So let's head over to Tampa at Dallas. I think this game has some interesting implications. One, because I don't think anyone's going to play either side of this game. And, I honestly think they may be right in doing so. Like, I don't see either team as being all that targetable. I've mentioned it time and time again. Dallas is not the sort of team that I want to target on any slate. Like, they're playing, like, Ken Hitchcock is basically instilled the same system he had in St. Louis, which made them one of the better defensive teams in the entire league. And Dallas is playing right up there with the best defensively right now. So, I don't think I'll have anyone from this game. But again, I mean, you have incredibly talented players, especially if Kucherov suits up, and you're getting them at very depressed ownerships. You're getting them, you know, I think cheaper than you might suspect. I'm looking at the top six in Tampa, and tonight they played a line for 18 minutes each of Tyler Johnson, JT Miller, and Adam Ernie. Like, yeah, it's not Stamkos and Point, but it's top six with, you got to expect that there'll be some variation in those lines. Like, they like to, John Cooper likes to kind of shuffle lines as the game goes and get different looks. So, especially if a guy like Tyler Johnson, who suited up in place of Kucherov on the top power play for 5.2. He's got 31 shots over his last 10 games. I don't think people are noticing that. I don't think people are noticing Adam Ernie playing up there at only 3,000. Like, I think these are just plays that, in GPPs, it makes perfect sense to stack up, especially on the cheaper guys on both sides of this game. On the Dallas side, you've got Janmark, who continues to float in and out of the top six. So I'm looking for a bit more clarity there. But you've got Brett Ritchie now on the first power play, which is definitely a thin play. But getting Klingberg in a stack only costs you 5,400 right now. The guy's got 54 points on the season. Like, he is really playing great hockey this year, And I'm more than willing to jump on it while his price has fallen to 5.4, given that the floor numbers are there in pretty large number for Klingberg. He's got, let's see, 30, no, he's got 43 blocks plus shots over the last 10 games and include his lethal power play one exposure, include the Tampa's on a back to back. I really like the prices in this game, even if I don't love the way that both teams are playing from a daily fantasy standpoint. I think you can get a lot of nice exposures to this game without spending through the nose on guys like Stamkos, Kucherov, um, Sagan, Ben, etc. So I would say Sagan is like the one guy who I would play in the upper tier from this game. But yeah, let's move on from there. Let's see. Jamie Benn is a center, which is interesting. Definitely not someone I will be playing. And then Radulov at above 6,000 is the other 5.8 is the other name that I'm not that interested in on this slate. But maybe keep an eye, see if his price falls another couple hundred if he has a down game here, because I really like the way that their prices are trending after, Radulov was 7K the other day and all that. So next game, Nashville at Edmonton. Edmonton just continues to roll out guys who probably don't belong on NHL rosters alongside McDavid, let alone, alongside McDavid, clearly. So last game, McDavid played on the line with Lucic and Anton Slepyshev. I think in the third period, or maybe the occasional shift here or there, Draisaitl stepped up with Lucic and McDavid, as you would suspect. So, not a ton of value there. Ryan Strome, 3.8, continues to play first power play, continues to put up pretty strong overall numbers. Definitely an upside type play, but 3.8 with power play exposure to McDavid at home. It's fine. But I think Nashville here is the interesting play. Minnesota's outburst on Tuesday's slate, I don't think will go overlooked. I think that playing against Arizona, they'll be owned heavily, significantly over-owned in my opinion, just as a precursor to my thoughts on the next game. But Nashville, I mean, they went into Winnipeg and they just seemed down and out from the get go. I don't think they were leading this game until well into the third period when they finally took the lead and won it. But they put up 6 on Hellebuck and the Jets, who, they're pretty freaking good. So I really like that play in terms of just a team. And then the names that you're looking at, I think they make a lot of sense here. We've got the defensemen who are, far and away the best set of defensemen for DFS in the industry. You're not getting them for cheap, but Ryan Ellis averaging 4 fantasy points per game over his last 10. PK Subban averaging almost 4 per game for the last 10, but he's the first guy over the boards for the penalty kill, for the power play. Regularly beats out Roman Josi in terms of overall ice time. And then you have Roman Josi himself, who had 5 assists in that ridiculous Tuesday night game. But even better than the assist for Roman Josi is the fact that his floor numbers are so incredible. He's got 54 block split shots over the last 10 games. You're not finding that sort of value anywhere. I'm not sure what the deal with Brent Burns is. He had a few big games and then just basically shat the bed against the Oilers on Tuesday. So you're saving $800 though by going from Burns to a guy like Josi, and I don't want to be accused of being, too reactionary to like the last slate. But if you've been listening to me for the last month, I've been saying Roman Josi's gonna just break out sooner than later. He was going through a pretty rough stretch, kind of similar to what Brent Burns is going through right now. But the shots and blocks are there, and they are in full force right now. He's got 10 points in his last 4 games alone, and even better than that, he's averaging 5 blocks with shots per game over that stretch, those 4 games. So he's just playing some incredible hockey right now, and is a name that I'll be looking long and hard at, especially if I'm stacking up Nashville here. So on the forward side, I think it gets a little bit dicier. in Nashville. Guys like Craig Smith, who are playing first power play and kind of like the main values you would suspect. Craig Smith is 5.5, coming off of a 8-game point streak right now. So, certainly I think it's warranted his price. But the minutes are, he hasn't cracked 16 minutes in 5 games now, which is a little bit, it's a little bit disturbing. He got up to 17 against Winnipeg, so I guess that trend kind of reversed itself. But I think it's a pretty good play, given the matchup, given the hot streak that he's been on without much of a price increase. Like, I think he was overpriced at the beginning of the hot streak, and I still kind of lean that way. But you could definitely make an argument that that's a fair price, if not a great price. That's definitely fair for him. And then outside of the main guys, like, I think paying mid fives for a stack of Nashville is very reasonable. So I really don't have a problem with any Nashville players so long as they are in the top 6. I'll just let you make your own line stacks with it, because I think that if you're not playing Pittsburgh or Florida, maybe Taylor Hall also takes precedent, but especially at the wings, I think Nashville gives you a lot of interesting values at wing, defense, just overall point per dollar in this mid tier that I'm going to be targeting heavily on this slate. Covered Edmonton, so let's move over to Minnesota at Arizona. Just a batshit insane game on Tuesday night. Minnesota put up one of the highest overall expected goals performances of the entire season, and they'd been playing so poorly before that. Maybe not poorly, but they've been playing so low pace before that game that even that game, slightly weighted up over the last 10. I think it's worth 15% of the projection that I used the last 10 games for. It's worth 15, and then the 10th game in the sample is worth about 5%, and then it averages from there to the full weighted average. Minnesota ranks 6th on this 16-team slate, despite that outburst. That just goes to show that Arizona is not a team that you should be targeting, because they're a bad team. I think they're okay to play guys against, but know that they're not one of the worst teams in the NHL in terms of expected goals against. Since the new year, they actually rank in the upper half of the league. I think they're 14th now, or maybe 15th in expected goals against per 60. Arizona is at home. They will be very well rested. I believe they have not played a game since. Let's see when the last time Arizona played a game was. Yeah, Vancouver on Saturday or Sunday night. So definitely a well-rested Arizona team at home. I don't see a ton of reason to fight the ownership and go with a Minnesota team that it hasn't really been playing that well lately. I did mention that they had such an incredible outburst against the Blues. I just wanted to point something out. On the entire season, Tuesday's game for Minnesota featured the highest expected goals for per 60 at 5-on-5 of any game this year. That is actually insane. The shot numbers weren't there for them either, which makes it, I think, even all the more impressive. They were an 84% expected goals for team on the night. So if you're a believer in hot streaks, they're certainly on one. That one game was worth about 2 of the average NHL team's games, maybe even 2.5. I think you could do the math there and come up with about that result. But I mean, Eric Staal, 7,300. I'm not paying more for Eric Staal than I am for Barkov, Trocheck, even Sidney Crosby. He's the same price as Connor McDavid. You're just not going to get me to bite. Mikael Granlund, Jason Zucker, upper 6s for each of those guys. I don't see it. I just don't. I think Charlie Coyle is an interesting name here. He had 8 shots in that blowout. He remains at 4,700, playing in a pretty decent role for them. So That's a decent spot to look at. But I think for me, it sticks with the defense in Minnesota. That those are just the guys that I think they're one of the better teams. I think they're the best team in the NHL in terms of getting their defense involved daily fantasy wise, just systems wise, because a lot of their shots come from outside and they rely on tips. A lot of the shots against them also come from the outside. So it makes Dubnyk's life easier and it also makes the defenseman's life easier in terms of blocking shots. Like Jared Spurgeon's averaging over 2 block shots per game on the season and averaging 2 shots on goal as well. Same with Ryan Suter. He's averaging just about 2 block shots per game. Like these are really strong numbers, floor numbers for mid-tier defensemen. And because Minnesota features these defensemen so highly on the power play as well, it seems to me as if Spurgeon and Suter are the main two now. Dumba got bumped to second pair, second power play unit over the boards status as of last game. So Spurgeon and Suter are the main ones, but 5.3 and 5.2 respectively. I think they're really, really strong plays. So I'm not looking to load up on Minnesota by any means, but I certainly understand if you want to. I'm just going to try and take a bit more of a long term approach to this, and I don't want to really play the ownership game. So, with that said, I have literally no interest in playing Arizona guys, even at low ownerships. Minnesota's been lights out defensively all season. So, what that what that hot game on Tuesday did do is it made really, 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 really good defensive numbers even better. So I this is the spot that I think I could stomach paying up for a guy like Dubnyk. He's super expensive. I don't think he'll be a massive favorite or anything, but when teams like Arizona, who don't get caved in terms of 5-on-5 shot production, when they have such a low like projected expected goals total, I'll play that game anytime. If you have a longer, how should I phrase this? If you have a shorter memory than I, you may forget that the last time Dubnyk went up against Arizona, let's see, he faced 40 shots against. This was a home game where Arizona was coming back the entire game. And so, it ended up going terribly for Dubnyk because he blew a lead. I think with 30 seconds left in the game, the lost in overtime, and it cost me a ton of money. So let's not revisit it for too long. But it just goes to show that if you play guys that you think are going to be on teams that go up big early, the score effects make it almost as like a multiplier effect. Like, yeah, sure, like Arizona could tie it up, but you'd rather your goalie be ahead than losing any time of the day. And in this matchup, I really like Minnesota to win. I just don't like the prices on the Minnesota guys. So I think a decent way to kind of offset your like risk, I guess, is to actually stomach it and pay the 8.5 for Dubnyk and maybe play a guy like Suter or Spurgeon who isn't reliant on goals and assists to crush value. Like if you get point out of Spurgeon, you could easily get 5 block shots and 3 shots on goal and get you, 6, 7 fantasy points and, walk away very, very happy with it. And I think Dubnyk is the best bet to get you a win here. So I think if you're spending up in net, that's where I would go for sure. However, we don't talk about goalies here, so that is all I'll say on goalies. Let's go to Chicago at San Jose. San Jose thrashed the Oilers on Tuesday night. Interestingly, Evander Kane played not only on a line in the top 6 with Pavelski and Donskoy, but they actually made room for him on the first power play. I believe I told someone in the group me like I would literally be floored if they played Kane on the power play one, given that they saw in Buffalo. I mean, Kane didn't even play on the first power play there. Kane didn't even play on the first power play when Jack Eichel went out. So like he was literally the 7th power play option on the Buffalo Sabres, who are clearly not as good as any team in the NHL or the AHL, you might argue. But for San Jose, he's playing on the first power play. If that holds, which I can't guarantee it will, they have guys like Timo Meier and Kevin Labanc kind of milling around that second power play unit, ready to jump up at a moment's notice. But if that holds, I mean, sure, Evander Kane is 6.6, only played 16 minutes last game, but we know Kane's going to shoot the puck. Like, that's not an issue. That's not a question. So I think, 6.6, you could certainly get away with playing Evander. If he plays that power play, he easily stacks with a guy like Brent Burns. He stacks with his line mate and Joe Pavelski, who I think he had a massive fantasy night as well on Tuesday, putting up 11 DraftKings points, a goal, 3 assists, and 3 shots on net. So you're paying up. Don't get me wrong. I don't really like their prices, but if you're looking for some context and what I think will be a really low owned play, I could get on board with that expensive stack just because we know that all these guys have really, really strong shot numbers. And in a home matchup with Chicago, I mean, yes, please. So let's see, I want to take a look at Thomas Yurko on Chicago just so I don't go crazy for another punt who ends up disappointing us. Uh, let's see, no news that Yurko was sent down, but what Thomas Yurko has done over the last 3 games is really intriguing to me. Um, you know, 3 games now of playing alongside Patty Kane. He's had a goal, an assist, and he's had at least 2 shots and blocks in each of the 3 games, playing 16 minutes a night on average. So when you're giving me a guy with direct Patrick Kane exposure with some power play time, which I believe he earned some power play time at the end of last game. Let me just look this up to be certain. All right, so there's no power play time for Yoko right now, um, but if he's on a 5-on-5 line with Patty Kane, he's crushing the AHL in terms of his shot numbers. I think he was at like 3.5 shots per game in the AHL in like a very large sample this season. And then he gets called up and hasn't been all that much of a disappointment. Last 3 games, 1 fantasy point, 3 fantasy points, 4.5. He's still 2.7. So that's a punt that I could definitely get behind. Playing with Anisimov and Kane as of last game, I would expect that to change. Forgive me for not boring you guys and looking that up from practice either today or yesterday. For not looking it up and keeping you guys waiting for too long. But that's a name that I think is really interesting in terms of a punt. And maybe him and Lindblom are 2 guys that, like, even though I was just telling you guys how I got burned for stacking cheap guys together, those 2 are cheap names that I think have a lot of merit to punting with in a lineup. Brent Seabrook at 48 blocks plus shots over the last 10 games with power play 1 time, uh, should be fine. I don't have a problem with Brent Seabrook, given that he's playing, 20 minutes for this Chicago team. And not only does he put up really good shot numbers, but he puts up really good blocks numbers as well. So if he lucks his way into a point for 4.2, that could pay off in a big, big fashion. Not really a whole lot else here that I'm interested in on either side. Um, Keith and Vlasic are both just very vanilla fantasy options to me. Keith actually does have 50 blocks plus shots over the last 10 with the 1 point to show for it. That 1 point being his first goal of the season. So make of that what you will. Like, Duncan Keith is probably better than a 10 point a season player, but this isn't really the matchup where I'm looking to go overboard with Chicago guys. Let's see. And then the last name that I think could be interesting is Alex DeBrincat at 4.4. Played 19 minutes last game. If you look at like recent trends in terms of shot rate, DeBrincat's right up there, top 40-ish in the NHL in terms of shot rate per minute. And if he's going to get 19 minutes again, which I don't think there's any sort of guarantee that he will, but with no Hartman, that's kind of another wing job open. Hartman was mostly playing 4th line minutes, but a little bit less risk to a guy like DeBrincat who goes up and down the lineup. 4.4 with power play time for Alex DeBrincat, I think, is a strong play as well. Last game of the night, Columbus at LA. LA with two pretty impressive wins against the Vegas Golden Knights on Monday and Tuesday. Um, Jeff Carter, probably the main catalyst for those victories with a goal in each, came off of an injury and now has 4 shots, 9 shots, 5 shots in the 3 games and has 2 goals now. So he's 5.3. Um, I'm a little bit concerned because in a matchup that the Kings won rather handily, I believe they were leading 3-1, like middle of the second. Jeff Carter only played 15 minutes in that one, so they're not really using him in so much of a defensive role, which I didn't expect him to anyways. But only playing 15 minutes in a winning effort does trouble me just a little bit. Um, so I think Jeff Carter's worth a look. Tyler Toffoli as well, 5.1 is a pretty good play, but the LA side isn't one that I'm actively targeting by any means. I think I'm more interested in the Columbus side. And on the Columbus side, despite being on the road in a relatively difficult matchup, grades out top 5 on the slate in terms of expected goals. And Panarin, Atkinson, they're each below 5K or 6K still. Seth Jones, 5.8. Like, yeah, we just saw them have massive, massive games against Washington. And, you're probably fooling yourself if you expect them to do that again. But I mean, the historical numbers are there for all 3 of them. Their recent performances there, obviously, and I just really think that Panarin, Atkinson, Jones, while they're all sub 6K, is one of the top stacks on any slate. So I really like that. Pierre Luc Dubois with them is still 4.6, playing on the first power play with Nick Foligno out. Let me just make sure there's no Foligno news that could change that. Um, I see they're activating him on Wednesday, which means he could be close. It seems like he'll play, but they're also reporting that he'll play on the second power play unit, so they may like Dubois up there. And what that means is that you'll have a first line of Dubois, Panarin, Atkinson with Seth Jones as the power play defenseman, and you're getting them for ridiculously cheap prices still. So um, I do like that stack in tournaments. I like getting a piece of that stack in cash games. It just makes a lot of sense. Like, it's not the best matchup. It's not really a spot that you'd want to target most of the time. But I think this slate has shown me that there's not a ton of slam dunks places to look. And when you can be so priced, make really solid price decisions and still get really good players with them, I think that the Columbus guys make for great plays all around. So I will make that one of my stacks. I'm going to pick another stack. I'm sure you guys will hate me because it's pretty obvious. But the other stack I'll pick is the Florida stack of you can go Trocheck, Barkov, Yandel is my preferred. If you're looking to play someone like Dubois, though, I certainly have no problem with Barkov, Dadonov, and Yandel together. Um, and then let's do some guaranteed goals. First, for the guaranteed goals, I'm going to go with Nolan Patrick at 4.7. I mentioned him earlier in the show. I just think he's in a really nice spot still. Broke his 4-game goal streak against the Canadians on Tuesday night, but I think he jumps right back on board against a Carolina team that's shown over and over again that they're just susceptible to giving up goals, even if they're dominating the shot counter. So I think Patrick finds his way into a goal. That gives me a lot of money, really, to use on my second goal. Uh, anywhere up to 7K, or yeah, right up about 7K. So that's pretty exciting. I can't quite afford Taylor Hall. So even though I said that like Taylor Hall was my top spend at wing, I don't think I'm going to do that. Instead, I'm going to go a little bit off the board, I think. I'm going to go with Roman Yossi for Nashville. Um, I was debating between Yossi and Subban in my mind. I I honestly don't know which one. Maybe for guaranteed goals, Subban has a bit more electric, a offensive profile that he's. I bet he's leading the two of them in terms of goals. Yeah, it's 15-10 in Subban's favor. But I just really like both plays. I really like both defensemen against Nashville. I don't think I would play them together because they don't really correlate together all that well. But I love both in terms of stacking with Nashville. So if you're multi-entering, I could really see myself going with some Yossi's and Nashville guys and some other Subans and Nashville guys, and just hoping that one of those two stacks like really just blows up for you. Um, so yeah, let's go with those stacks and those guaranteed goals. I don't really have anything else to mention. I covered everything that I wanted to kind of plug wise at the beginning of the show. So thank you for sticking with me through that and through this 8 game slate preview. If you're looking for more daily fantasy information, be sure to check out morningskatepod.com. We have the sim. I kind of mentioned everything else about the site, so check out everything else on the site too. But the sim for your projections needs, just really solid night in, night out. You know, it's a lunch pail player. Just shows up to work, nose to the grindstone, does the job, no complaints. The sim works like a charm. And also follow us on Twitter at Morning Skate Pod. So thank you all for listening. Best of luck on the slate. From Doug, from DJ, from myself, have a good slate, everybody, and we will see ya.